Every love story has a hidden truth, and every heart hides a lie. Sometimes the things we leave unsaid are the ones that haunt us the most. Diary of love and lies. Stories that feel real because they are.
It all began on a quiet Sunday morning in Brookside, a peaceful suburb outside Chicago where life seemed almost perfectly ordinary. The streets were lined with tall maple trees whose leaves whispered softly in the breeze. Small cafes buzzed with weekend chatter, and neighbors greeted each other politely across manicured lawns. On the surface, everything looked calm and predictable, but beneath that calm, storms were slowly forming inside the walls of one modest house on Willow Lane. Ethan Parker, 32 years old, was the kind of man people trusted without hesitation. He worked as a software engineer at a busy tech company in downtown Chicago. His life followed a steady routine that rarely changed. Every morning he went for a jog through Brookside Park, stopping afterward for a cup of black coffee at Cafe Marigold before catching the train to work. In the evenings, he returned home, cooked dinner, and spent quiet time with his wife. Friends often described him as loyal, patient, and dependable. Some even joked that Ethan was too kind for his own good. His wife, Lila Parker, 29, was stunning in a soft and effortless way. Her chestnut hair shimmered when sunlight touched it, and her warm smile could light up any room. She worked at a growing marketing agency in the city, where creativity and ambition drove everything. While Ethan loved stability, Lila craved excitement. She loved fast conversations, ambitious ideas, and the thrill of chasing something bigger than suburban routine. For 5 years they had been married, and to the outside world their life seemed perfect. They had a beautiful home, stable careers, and the kind of quiet relationship that looked strong from a distance. But inside their marriage, small cracks had begun to form. Conversations grew shorter. Smiles became polite rather than genuine. Lila often seemed distracted, lost in thoughts she never shared. At first, Ethan ignored the signs. When Lila said she needed to stay late at work, he believed her. When she mentioned girls' nights with coworkers, he encouraged her to have fun. Trust had always been natural for him. But one Tuesday evening, something changed. Lila had left her phone on the kitchen counter while she went upstairs to shower. Ethan wasn't searching for anything suspicious. In fact, he barely paid attention until the screen suddenly lit up with a new message notification. A name appeared across the display: Derek Vaughn. Then the message preview flashed for just a moment. Can't wait to see you tonight. Alpha energy only. Ethan's chest tightened instantly. He stared at the screen, trying to understand what he had just read. The phrase made no sense, yet something about it felt deeply wrong. His hand slowly reached for the phone, and before he could stop himself, he opened the message thread. What he saw made his stomach drop. There were weeks of conversations, flirting, private jokes, plans to meet after work. Messages filled with subtle affection and hidden meaning. The tone between them wasn't friendly. It was intimate. Ethan stood frozen in the kitchen, feeling as if the ground beneath him had shifted. Over the next few days, he said nothing. Instead, he quietly observed. He noticed details that suddenly seemed obvious. Lila had started wearing a new perfume he had never smelled before. Her phone rarely left her hand. Sometimes she smiled faintly at the screen before quickly locking it. When Ethan asked simple questions like, "How was work?" she answered quickly and changed the subject. For the first time in his life, Ethan felt like an outsider in his own marriage. One night, while lying awake beside her, he realized something painful. He had always loved Lila completely, but somewhere along the way she had stopped seeing him the same way. The confrontation came a few days later. It was late evening. The house was quiet except for the soft glow of the living room lamp. Lila sat on the couch scrolling through her phone when Ethan walked in. His voice was calm, but there was an edge to it. "Lila, who's Derek?" Her fingers stopped moving instantly. She looked up slowly, her face pale. "What do you mean?" she asked, trying to sound casual. Ethan placed her phone on the coffee table. The open messages were impossible to ignore. "I mean this." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Lila's mind raced, searching desperately for an explanation, but every excuse sounded weak even in her own thoughts. It's complicated," she finally whispered. Ethan let out a quiet, bitter laugh. "Complicated? You call this complicated?" Tears filled Lila's eyes, but she couldn't look away from the truth staring back at her. I didn't mean for things to happen like this, she said softly. I just felt trapped. Everything felt predictable. Ethan listened silently, waiting for her to finish. Then Lila said something that cut deeper than any confession. You're like a golden retriever, she muttered. Loyal, sweet, but predictable. I need someone with alpha energy, someone strong and exciting. The words hung in the air like broken glass. For a moment, Ethan felt his heart shatter. Every memory of their marriage flashed through his mind. Wedding vows, holidays together, dreams they had once shared. But instead of exploding with anger, something unexpected happened. He became calm. Without saying another word, Ethan walked out of the room. Over the following week, he didn't argue or plead. He simply watched and listened. Meanwhile, Lila's confidence slowly turned into anxiety. Ethan's silence unsettled her more than anger ever could. Because during that same week, Ethan had been learning more about Derek Vaughn. Through social media and mutual contacts, he discovered Derek's reputation. Derek was charismatic, bold, and charming, but also notorious for pursuing married women at the office. For him, it was a game, a way to boost his ego. Lila had been drawn to the illusion of excitement, but Derek was never serious. A week later, Ethan asked Lila to meet him at Cafe Marigold, the same cafe where they had shared their first date years ago. The evening air was cold as they sat across from each other near the window. You're nervous, Ethan said quietly. Lila looked down at her hands. You've been playing with fire, he continued calmly, and fire doesn't care who gets burned. Tears rolled down her cheeks. I didn't think it would go this far, she whispered. Far enough to destroy everything? Ethan asked. She couldn't answer. Days passed in heavy silence. Lila spent long hours alone, replaying every mistake she had made. Meanwhile, Ethan focused on work, trying to rebuild the emotional distance he now needed. Then one evening Derek called her. His voice sounded impatient, almost irritated. Your husband suspects something, he said. You need to keep things quiet. For the first time, Lila truly heard the selfishness in his tone. There was no concern for her, no care for the chaos he had caused. Her hand trembled as she held the phone. No, she said finally. What? Derek replied sharply. It's over, she said firmly. I made a mistake. Don't call me again. She ended the call before he could respond. For the first time in weeks, she felt a strange sense of relief, but relief didn't erase the damage she had caused. Weeks later, Ethan returned home from work to find Lila sitting quietly in the living room. Her eyes were red, but her expression was determined. I'm sorry, she said softly as he walked in. Not just for cheating, for disrespecting you, and us. Ethan stood silently, studying her face. I lost myself, she continued, and I almost lost the best thing in my life. His heart felt torn between love and self-respect. Finally he spoke. Words aren't enough anymore, he said calmly. If you want to fix this, you prove it. The months that followed were not easy. There were awkward mornings and silent dinners. Some nights Ethan questioned whether forgiveness was even possible. But slowly, Lila began to change. She became transparent about everything. She rebuilt trust piece by piece with honesty, patience, and humility. Ethan, though still cautious, began to see glimpses of the woman he had once fallen in love with. Months later, on a crisp autumn evening, they walked together along Willow Lane. Maple leaves crunched beneath their shoes, while golden streetlights glowed above them. Lila squeezed Ethan's hand gently. I almost destroyed everything, she whispered. Ethan looked ahead at the quiet street. Maybe, he replied, but sometimes people learn the most when they almost lose everything. They continued walking slowly beneath the amber lights, their future still uncertain but no longer broken. Because sometimes love doesn't survive because it's perfect. Sometimes it survives because two imperfect people decide the fight for it is worth more than their pride. And on that quiet street in Brookside, the storm that once threatened to destroy them had finally passed, leaving behind something fragile but real.